All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Sera Evcimen. She is going to talk about hardware startup pitfalls and how to avoid them. Thank you very much. This is going to be a little bit of a wake you up talk, so come on in here, get ready. Here goes. Please welcome to the stage Sera Evcimen.
All right. How's everyone doing? How's the energy in the room? Woo! Okay. It's like right slump time. Like we all ate. Now we want to take a nap. So I'm going to actually do a very annoying thing. I hate when people do this, but can we all get up? Can we all get up and stretch? Let's stretch. Yeah. Like, all right. Yes. See, everyone needed that. I see smiles all around. Amazing. You could sit down. I mean, you could stand up. That's totally fine. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to be talking about some hardware pitfalls. I completely recognize that I'm kind of the odd one out here. I'm not a firmware engineer. I'm not a huge software person, but I'm a mechanical engineer. So a lot of the hardware, when I say hardware, is like just like think of like a physical product. It might not be PCBs, but just wanted to say that. I want to start with just saying thank you. I'm incredibly honored to be here among all of the incredible speakers that we had. Also, shout out to Supply Frame for having me. I'm incredibly grateful to be speaking at the hardware capital of Europe, so thank you so much. All right. Without the excessive sensory overload here, I just wanted to do a quick recap of who I am because, well, some of you know me, most of you don't. So my name is Sera. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, as I said. I am incredibly passionate about the physical space and physical products. I've worked in a few startups in my entire career. I was a serial startup employee. A lot of people talk about being a serial entrepreneur. I was the person next to the entrepreneur trying to make their dream a reality. So I started working on satellites, which you can see on the right side, which actually went up to space, and it has my name engraved in it. And then I transitioned to consumer electronics, which you see the bracelet that I worked on. Didn't quite love consumer electronics, really much preferred deep tech. So I transitioned and did a full U-turn and actually worked on fusion energy. I worked at Commonwealth Fusion Systems, and I built the superconductor cable line, the manufacturing line that built the superconductor cables that would go into the central solenoid, which is in the middle of there. And then I went to Toyota Research Institute, worked on tactile sensing robotics research. And then as I kind of started doing these, also worked on ion thrusters, which is for satellite station keeping. Anyway, but basically throughout all of these were all startups. And time in, time out, I just kept seeing stuff that was going wrong. I was an employee, couldn't do much, but what happened was a few accelerators picked up that I've worked serially in these startups, and I became a mentor in residence. So I started to actually work with a lot of startups to help them avoid these pitfalls that all of you engineers work on these really like amazing technologies and put in a lot of effort and time, and when they don't conceptualize into something in the world, that really breaks my heart, and it's such a waste. So my whole spiel is to prevent that from happening, and these are the organizations that I've been a part of, given talks in, just to give you kind of a sense of who I am. And nowadays, I have my own company. I spend my time partnering with startups and basically going into their lab, building their products with them, understanding the pitfalls that they might run into, and help them strategize their way out of it. In addition to that, I'm also doing a master's program in London on tribology. If anyone wants to talk about tribology under mechanical engineering, it's the study of contact. It's not the study of tribes. Just saying that. Okay, so that's me in a nutshell. Okay, starting with the why. I kind of already said this, but I'll say it again. 97% of hardware startups fail. This is by far more than software startups, and there's a reason for that. A lot of people talk about successes, not a lot of people talk about failures. And also, people who do talk about failures usually see the end result, but not the symptom that got to that end result. So this whole talk, unfortunately, is not going to be super deeply technical, but it's going to be something where it's pitfalls that you want to avoid so that your product can make it into the market and actually exist and make an impact in the world. And I have a world there because most of the common and most important problems that we have in the world need hardware solutions. And come fight me on that. But basically, I want more hardware startups to succeed, and that's what I'm working on. So bear with me. Okay. So the reason this is important from like an engineering level, so this is a visual that I really like, created by Baukunst, which is a VC firm in the US. And it's basically distinguishing between an ecosystem and an ecosystem. This all to say, and why I'm using this, is decisions influence each other. The decisions you make as an engineer influence the business, and the decisions you make about the business influence the engineer on the daily. They're all interconnected. It's like a system of equations. They are always turning. So every single thing I mentioned here, you might be like, this doesn't really affect like what I do, or it doesn't matter if I do this. It's not true. It really does. And the potential outcomes of this, I'm teeing it up so long, I'm sorry, but I just want to make sure I cover all the grounds. But some things I show you might be incredibly obvious. That's great. That means that you're probably not going to fall into that pitfall. Awesome. Some might be validating. You might be in a startup where you're seeing this kind of happen. You're not sure. It doesn't feel right. So you needed some validation. I hope that I can give that to you. And best case would be uncovering an unknown so that you can completely avoid it. Is anyone working on a startup? Are there any entrepreneurs in here? Oh, hell yeah. Great. Good job, guys. Anyone interested in potentially starting a company one day? All right. This is great. Awesome. You should do it, by the way. If you're looking for a sign, this is it. Do it. Okay, let's start from the beginning, which is the problem. What the hell do I mean by that? The problem that you're trying to solve. This is obviously something that you need to hold near and dear to your heart. But one pitfall that commonly happens is people fall in love with the solution rather than the problem. So they have this problem that maybe they've been thinking about forever, and then they find a solution to it. They're very excited about it. They maybe sink a lot of money and time and people into it, and they keep drilling and drilling and drilling. And maybe they get test results that are showing them that the solution isn't going to work, or it doesn't have any economic, like a techno-economically, it doesn't make sense. But they keep going at it because of the sunk cost fallacy of just like, I've spent so much time, I have a 15-person team. This is to kind of like have moments where you stop and reflect, is this the solution, the right solution, or like should we maybe revisit? A really good example of this is Makani. Does anyone know Makani? Has anyone watched this documentary? One guy in the back. Yes. So this is something that I highly recommend to anyone that's in a startup or is thinking of us. Honestly, anyone that's an engineer should watch this. It's awesome. Usually startup stories go untold and unwatched. This is one particular thing where they documented the entire startup life from its conception and their testing. I'll give a teensy spoiler, but hopefully you'll watch it in your own time. They were trying to build a kind of like a wind turbine, but they would put, I'm doing such a bad explanation of this, but basically they had all of their generators on a large, like it was kind of like a yo-yo, and they would try to get the energy from farther away because there's a limit to how long a wind turbine blade can be. So they were trying to solve that problem by basically tethering where the energy gets collected, and then they were trying to collect it. And it was like a fluid's nightmare to figure out like how to make this happen in an efficient manner. And then they didn't keep track of the economics, and then they went under, and they released this documentary to show people how it's important to keep the problem right at the center, but maybe be more skeptical of your solution. Okay, this is another pitfall, poor scoping and prioritization. This happens all the time, where basically on the weekly basis, if you ask any startup employee what the priorities are, you'll get a different answer. And it also kind of, when you look at scoping, it differs between post-it notes and empty promises, or you have a 35-page long project plan with 300 pages of a PRD, which is product requirements document, where for a startup, you kind of want to be in the middle, where you have a high-level system architecture, you have your risk register, and then maybe you have a Kanban board that could be split into weekly sprints. Why is this particularly hard in startups? Like, project management has been something that's around forever. Like, why doesn't it quite work with startups? So I'm going to go into a short plan tangent. Try to be smart about it. You see the tangent in the corner? Yeah. So I want to give kind of an analogy, which is like a restaurant. So an established hardware company, or you can even think of like a construction project. So I'm going to go off the restaurant analogy. It's like a cheesecake factory, if you've ever seen one. I thought of putting up a German chain, but I couldn't really find one that everyone might know, so Cheesecake Factory it is. So when you go to the Cheesecake Factory, you have a waiter come to you. They give you a menu. The menu has a lot of line items of all of the food and prepared recipes, and the supply chain is all set. They have the tomatoes, they have the onions, like everything is back there. And then you look at the menu, you choose one of them. They also have data of how many people have chosen which one, so they stock accordingly, etc. And then you get your food, you get your taco, and you get your coffee. Startups, a little different. Restaurant looks something like this. Menu looks something like this. You're not a known name. You don't have a supply chain. You have some expertise. And you have an idea of what your customers might want. And so you go to the restaurant, you sit down, the CEO comes to take your order, and you're like, okay, sure. That's weird, but we'll go with it. And then you look at the menu, and it just says fish, so you're like, fish, sure, sounds good. And then they prepare you a beautiful plate of salmon. They do their best. They put a lot of effort into it. They discuss in the background. You wait a very long time. You're like, what is taking so long? I just asked for fish. Then you get it, and they say, and then the customer says, I wanted halibut. And they're like, okay, crap. Okay, they wanted halibut. We did salmon. God damn it. Okay, so you need to find the halibut. You need to find the supplier. You need to get it delivered. You need to try a new recipe. And then you bring it to the customer within a reasonable time because the customer is going to not want to wait. So you cook a beautiful plate of halibut. Then they say, this is cooked too much. I don't like it cooked this much. And then you need to find another halibut because you didn't order 2 at the first try, and then you get it delivered, and you cook it less, but maybe this time you're a little smart, and you ask your customer exactly what temperature they want. You don't want to run into that again. And then you bring it to the customer within a reasonable time, let's say. So you have this beautiful Michelin star halibut, right? And now the customer's like, this is too expensive. I don't like the dressing. It's too dry. The restaurant across the street does it for half the price. Et cetera, et cetera. The iteration loop repeats itself. So you can imagine, this is not super easy to scope, is it? The scope kept creeping. They were like, oh, we just need to prepare fish. Now we have to prepare 3 different types of fish and find a different recipe, et cetera. And this is why it's important to acknowledge that in a startup, there are unknown unknowns. Task creation is basically a guessing game. Some within a small scope, if you're a mechanical engineer, you need to design something. Those tasks are easy, but you don't know how many times you need to do that, so that's hard. And then task duration estimation is just a game of roulette because you might do a test and it might not come up with the results that you want, especially if you're developing a new technology. So you're going to have to maybe run a test that you thought was going to take 2 hours, takes 2 months because you couldn't quite get it to work. And if there's anyone in research, yeah, I get the head shakes from people in research. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like doing research with the pressure of venture capital, which sounds like hell on earth. It's fun, I promise. And then the importance of trial testing and execution, but also the difficulty and the speed. This is really important to acknowledge. You got to plan to replan, and then you do weekly evaluation. Okay, you might ask, well, Sarah, is it possible? Like, can you successfully scope it? Yeah, well, kinda. I'll give you some guidelines just so you come out with something. The best way to scope a startup or a technology, in my opinion, is to go from the root of the risks, issues, and opportunities. You might have heard this in like systems engineering. It actually works really well with this. And obviously, don't go overboard. Do not make a 300-page document on this. Everyone tends to go that way. Don't. And then when you have your risks are what you are going to test. You need to de-risk those to a certain degree to make yourself feel comfortable and your investors to feel comfortable and your customers to feel comfortable. Your issues are things that you know are wrong that you need to fix, also through testing and prototypes. Your opportunities are what your R&D team might be working on to make your product more competitive. So just to kind of give the scope of that. And then the de-risking plan is prototypes, tests, and other stuff. Your product roadmap is also quite important to understand how what you're doing right now is going to contribute to the future. So why, when, where, and how of what you do is really critical for your company to have like a long-lasting lifetime. And then weekly execution loops. So you see these like circles that I created? That's what I'm trying to kind of explain, and I have an example. So this is from Commonwealth Fusion Systems. I work there, and this is where it was kind of cemented into my brain to think about it this way. It's kind of a high-level systems thinking. So they created a model coil for the toroidal magnets, which are those kind of D-shaped. In order to create the right D-shaped toroidal field magnet, they looked all the way to their commercial vision. So they said, in order for the commercial vision to happen, what does our demo mission need to be? And then for that demo mission to be successful, what should our magnet look like? So that's the top-down approach, to kind of tie it all together. And then they went, okay, so we have this model coil. What is it going to de-risk to make the demo work? And what is the demo going to de-risk to make the commercial work? So this is this like integrated lifespan analysis to be able to figure out, okay, what I'm doing today, how is that going to make this company successful, or this product successful, or this impactful system successful? Okay, I'm going to dive back into pitfalls. That was my short plan tangent. Just going to check the time. All right, we're good. Okay, so over and under constraining the design space. I feel like everyone has been in teams where there's over constraining, where it's like, if it's innovation, it's really hard to define exactly what you need to be doing, because if you already know, then it's probably not an innovative product. It's probably something someone else has done. And if you're under constraining, which is more likely in a startup, then you're kind of just shooting in the dark. I mean, your product can go anywhere. So you need somewhere in the middle. Has anyone seen this before? Yes. Head shakes all around. Okay, so look at it again, please. Because we still make these, I mean, I'm also one to make this problem, but basically, it's just like this comical meme that they show in, I think, your first engineering class, where it's just like how the customers explained it, how you understood it, what you documented. If you see that left bottom corner, nothing gets documented. I see you. I see people nodding. And basically, like, what the customer really needed. These technically all have to match each other, but they never do. So it's like making sure that you have enough constraints that it matches close enough. And you'll never get it perfect, and that's OK. Good enough is fine. But yeah, so that's I guess, the point. Rushing the decision to insource versus outsource. This is something that happens, and this is why I showed you that kind of ecosystem mindset. When you're in an engineering team, sometimes you're trying to move so quickly that you're like, oh, we're just like outsource that to this buddy of mine, or like, oh, we'll do this here, and that decision gets made in 30 seconds. But it's actually a good idea to stop and be like, okay, hold on. Like, what do we want to do in-house, and what do we want to outsource? Because you want to ask these 4 questions. What are the core competencies do we want to build up in-house? Because if you outsource that core competency, you're risking your IP, you're not training your employees. There's a lot of risks associated with that. And then what parameters matter for the product, and what are the constraints? Like, understanding that before you go into insourcing and outsourcing is critical. And obviously, understanding the number of units and when those are needed, because sometimes, I mean, you have like a 5-person team. If you need 200 of a component, that's not really reasonable, is it? And then also, what part do you insource versus outsource? Because this also isn't a global decision. You could outsource a component, but you can insource a subsystem. You can outsource a subsystem, but you could integrate the full system in-house. And like, those will give you different core competencies and teach you something about your product. But it's like, this is a decision. Don't rush it. this is a sneaky one. Letting early stage resource scarcity dictate future manufacturing strategy. I say manufacturing, this is kind of true for really everything. Resource scarcity creates a mindset and makes you make decisions in that kind of scarcity mindset. And once you are selling or you get really good investment, you need to understand that now your framework has shifted. It's changed. So it's important to acknowledge that and move forward with that. The example I'm going to give here is more so 3D printing. Best thing ever. Love doing it. Highly recommend if you haven't. I'm sure everyone has here. But it's like if you only had access to 3D printers and you design something for 3D printing, but you need to make 2,000 of them and it needs to go into injection molding, sometimes the way that you design will be influenced by a 3D printer instead of an injection molder. So that's kind of what I mean. It's like, think of the long term of like, how am I going to manufacture this when it's in the thousands, and try to kind of bring that into now, if you can. Not building the first, I say 10 to 50 units, that's kind of an arbitrary number. If it's a big system, which is most of the systems I work on are industrial scale, so if I say to someone, oh, build 50 carbon capture and sequestration, they'll just look at me in the face and probably turn away. So that's not what I mean. If it's a big system, maybe 1 or 2. But doing it in-house before outsourcing or scaling is so critical because you learn so much and you become the expert of your product. And that is so useful because you learn the DFX performance. If you've built something like this and no one else can build it, right? You understand your assembly time. So when you go to a contract manufacturer and they quote you that a process that took you 5 minutes is taking them an hour, you can call BS. I don't think I can swear, so I'll just keep it PG. And then also assembly-induced failure modes. You probably have a pretty skilled team. When you go to a contract manufacturer or you outsource, sometimes they're not as skilled, or you can foolproof your design before you outsource it to other people. So this is really important to do at least 1 or 2, or if it's a small enough thing, tens of maybe hundreds of them in-house first so you get these critical learnings. Okay, so I'm going to take a 10-second water break. 1 sec. Okay, has anyone seen this picture before? Of the iPhone? Okay, so this is the iPhone test bed. So this is what, basically, function-wise, it could do anything an iPhone can do. But I don't think anyone can fit that in their pocket, can they? Unless you have big pockets, which, cool. But basically, what this is trying to signify is a lot of innovative companies are developing technologies. And the first informative years of the startup, say 2 to 5 years, is really spent upon understanding the technology, making sure you're not breaking physics, and also de-risking the product and the systems in many ways. But what that kind of does is, first, it attracts researchers. Like, usually you hire researchers or people with research backgrounds. You get a lot of cultural crystallization around the fact that you are de-risking technology and you're learning, you're trying to learn the science of your product. But failing to transition from that into a product mindset also kills businesses because you can't always do science. You can't always do research. You need to go into the mindset of, okay, how is this going to get marketed? How is this going to exist? How do we do in-field testing? How do we figure out logistics? How do we have really good customer service, et cetera? This transition is critically important and oftentimes lost in translation. I'm nearing the end, I promise. I'm not going to continuously plummet you with many more pitfalls. I'm getting there. But approaching manufacturers and suppliers too soon or too late is always a pitfall that I see a lot of the startups I work with struggle with, where it's like they're either still testing fundamentals and they're like, oh, we should talk to suppliers and try to get all of our supply chain sorted, but they're not going to sign a paper contract with the supplier for, I don't know, 5 years, and the supplier won't even remember them. Not a great time to talk to them. Or they want to perfect everything and then talk to a supplier, and then the supplier comes and says, well, we can't make that. You like put this screw in a really weird place. Like, that's not going to work for us, or we don't work with that material. We can't machine it, etc. So either ends of the spectrum are wrong, and mostly it's probably somewhere in the middle. And it's important to also pick the right fit of supplier versus startup. So it's like in a sea of customers, the startup is usually that little dead fish that you see that I pointed and said you. And this is something to note. Not to say that you don't have any leverage. You do. You're still going to give them money. But it's important to pick the right fit instead of picking giants. So if we play the vendor is right game, it's important to look at their annual revenue and how much you make up. Good rule of thumb is around 5%. Capacity utilization, how much of their capacity is your product going to take? What their minimum order quantity is, because if you're in the business and you're looking to buy 50 and their minimum order quantity is 50,000, maybe not the right call. Their customer profile and diversity. Maybe they have big shot names, but they want to invest in startups, and their big thing. That could work. Like that might make sense, but you need to look into it. Also, it's bothering me that 10% has the 0 on the bottom. So that's 5 to 10%, just so you know, not 0%. And then reinvestment in technology. How much do they reinvest from their revenues? Who can agree with this? That quality, low cost, and less time can't happen at once. Yeah? Thumbs up, thumbs up. Hell yeah. Okay. Cool. I don't even have to say anything. You got it. So I have a personal story that I want to share because I think sharing is caring, and that's why we're all here. So not having boots on the ground at the manufacturing supplier is one of the biggest mistakes you can make. I nearly made it. So basically, when I was working on a team to scope out equipment to manufacture a product. And we were talking to a supplier. It was COVID. So we were just kind of Zooming with them and everything. They seemed super apt. They knew what they were talking about. Everything made sense. And we were like, awesome. Like, they gave a good price. They know what they're talking about. They've been helpful. They've been so generous with their time. Check, check, check. Green all around. So at the end, I was like, you know what? Before we sign anything, we should ask for at least like a FaceTime of their facility, just so we like see it. Thank God I asked, because my expectation was something like this, you know, like a nice ISO certified manufacturing facility. This is an actual picture, by the way. I didn't just like copy it from online. And you don't see this, but there's a car on the right. Like this guy was gonna build this in their garage. And honestly, he probably could have. Like I don't doubt him. But it was obviously not a risk worth taking. We were a startup. We were going to invest all this money. Like, we need to make sure that it's built in a safe and secure environment where there aren't trip hazards and looks like a World War II scene. So very important. Take your engineers to the factories before you sign any documents, to say the least. And then this is kind of my ending point, because financing is one of the most important things for startups. And one thing is that there is an overutilization of equity financing in startups, and it could really lead to poor VC and startup fit. If you have a hardware startup and you're working with VCs, or you've talked to VCs, they don't really understand hardware and timelines most of the time. There are some VCs that do, and I respect them and I work with them. But most of them don't, and that fit is really important, because they will force you to do things in software deadlines for hardware, which don't quite work, as I said before. There could be an incorrect capital need assessment. Most of the time when I pressure startups into understanding their budgets, they rarely have really clear reasoning. So it's like when you're building your budgets, like build your bill of materials, talk to some suppliers, get some quotes, like do a little bit more due diligence on yourself to make sure that you're not over-raising and trying to get a lot of money for something that you might not need. And yeah, basically there's a lot of push to scale the incorrect product because they want you to give them the return of investment, so they're going to continuously be like, okay, ship it. This is a cool visual from Extantia, which is a VC actually out of Berlin, I think. And they're also in London. But they kind of give this like 33%. I mean, this is just like an oversimplification in my opinion. And in the US, debt is really not a great idea. But like this is just to get people to start thinking of equity is not your only game. And there are grants and other things that you could do, some crowdfunding that you can do to make your startup successful. I always end with this. This is my kind of tagline. When you're building a startup and you're building a product, you're not only building a product, but you're building a company and a reputation. And every single decision that you make should take into account all three. Because when you're building your company, you have people that surround you that are also championing your mission. So you need to take care of them. With your product, I already talked your ear off about that, so you got it. And then reputation is when you launch, I mean, it's out there in the world. People are going to judge your product. So be mindful of creating an ecosystem that protects the product, whether it's logistics or customer service or anything like that. Don't put those things in the back burner until the last minute because it'll really bite you. So I spoke a lot. I am sick of my own voice. So I just wanted to kind of give this like kind of key takeaway. If you got nothing, these are the main things to take away from this. Focus on the problem, be skeptical of your solution, constantly prove yourself that it's the right one. Use risks, known issues, and opportunities to scope your innovation. Revisit and communicate priorities weekly so that everyone's aligned. Have requirements written down, but do not do too much, please. It just becomes a complete waste of effort because you're constantly replanning. Build the first 10 to 20 units or 1 to 2 for large systems in-house. Plan your transition from tech dev to product, and be mindful of that when you're culturally creating a company. Engage suppliers softly in preliminary design. Send engineers to factories. That's in red and underlined because I have trauma attached to it, so I just have to talk about it. And always know you are trading off one of the three: quality, time, or cost. And last but not least, be kind, willing to teach, and patient with people who are learning to build hardware. The amount of times I've been, like, the door slammed in my face and people not willing to teach, I could have quit engineering. I didn't, but someone else could have. So just please be kind if people are curious. And this is not just going to, it's easy to mentor people who are maybe young engineers or people that are like kind of like below you in the totem pole. But like there could be people that are managing you that's like annoying to teach to because you're like, you're my manager, you should know more. But if they're showing curiosity, they're not going to know everything. So kind of take your ego out of it and be kind and willing to teach them, because that's the only way we all grow. And that's why I put the little seal of saying, don't judge me, in the corner. And with that, I say thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, come find me. One last thing, I'm so sorry. I actually have a podcast to help hardware entrepreneurs and hardware builders. There is an episode on firmware, which you probably listen to and be like, this is so preliminary and rudimentary, I don't care. But there is one, so I put it on there. But then I cover all kinds of topics that are related to hardware. The Ying Liu one on the right that you see, she built the entire supply chain of Apple for the first iPhone in China. So she's just like an impressive individual. And then Scott built the entire manufacturing for the iRobot Roomba, the ones that clean. So yeah, and Alicia is huge, and she was in the core group at Fitbit when they were first launching, and a lot of people probably already know her. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Stay tuned. Next talk in 5 minutes. First, a super quick announcement. Last year, Tina had a